A massive Toronto Maple Leafs trade is incoming following Nick Robertson demanding a trade away from the Toronto Maple Leafs. So I'm going to break that down in this episode, as well as discuss what it means going forward, as free agency is less than 24 hours away from now. So stay tuned for that in this episode, as well as a shocking Tyler Bertuzzi report. Everything is pointing towards him leaving, according to multiple reports, and it seems like Toronto Maple Leafs are now out of the running for the forwards. Stay tuned for all that. Before we do, if you're a part of the large percentage who aren't subscribed, now is the time to hit the subscribe button. We're making multiple videos a day, 3 to 4. Tomorrow is when free agency opens. We're going to be going live as soon as free agency starts, so stay tuned for that. And of course, we'll have videos throughout the day. But Darius, it's 10 p.m. Eastern, or past 10 p.m. Eastern at this point. Lots of news is dropping, and some shocking news, quite frankly, to drop this late on a Sunday night with Canada Day tomorrow. At least everybody's off work, so that's one thing we can have fun with. But sources say that Nick Robertson has no plans to re-sign with the Leafs this summer and has informed the team that he would like to be traded. And this is just hours after the Leafs picking up his RFA option here. So Darius, we're going to break it all down, but I just want to get your thoughts on this. A bit of a bombshell, not necessarily the fact that he wants to be traded, but the fact that he doesn't even want to play a game with the Toronto Maple Leafs next year, and probably a lot to do with Sheldon Keefe.
Yeah, I would say a lot to do with Sheldon Keefe, not to kick him, since he's already out the door. But yeah, it seems like Nick Robertson does not want to return and would rather be traded to get a better opportunity somewhere else. I wonder, though, if this relationship could somehow be fixed or saved in some way, because we saw with Jake DeBrusk in Boston. He asked for a trade, I think 2 seasons ago now, and he was still a Boston Bruin until, he became an UFA this free agency coming up tomorrow. So I wonder if there's a world where they can kind of fix the relationship. Maybe he meets with Berube and, Berube has a plan for him, or maybe he just doesn't fit in their plans either, right? We haven't heard that from the team, just only from Robertson's side, and he wants to move on. But it's unfortunate because I still think there's a lot left with this player. We talked about it in our last video, right? I had a little segment there what I thought that this player still has a lot to offer for the Toronto Maple Leafs. So it's very interesting. Obviously, they gave him a qualifying offer today. He still has to accept that, and they can always sign him to another contract, right? They didn't have to just go with that, but it seems like he doesn't want to accept that. He wants to trade away, and it's interesting. A trade has to come too, because their free agency plans really haven't added up yet. Like, the money is not really making sense, and we'll get to it in the more so in the Bertuzzi stuff, but something has to give. So I guess maybe Robertson might be one of the first dominoes, but for the Leafs to be done with all they've done so far, it just doesn't make sense. The money's not making sense. I still think a lot is going to happen here.
Tomorrow's going to be the big day, and it's probably going to start with Chris Tanev. But yeah, Nick Robertson, I would be shocked if he ends up staying with the Leafs. He did mention the Jake DeBrusk thing, but I just don't think I understand it, honestly, from Nick Robertson's perspective. He kind of got put in the Keefe dog cage. He's put up some very, very good stats in limited time with the Toronto Maple Leafs on the ice. I mean, he put up 14 goals in 56 games. He obviously didn't perform as well as we thought he could have, but he also was given, on and off opportunities. When you're being put in one day, not in the other day, you can get hot and cold, and that's ultimately what happened with Nick Robertson. And I would not be surprised when and if he's traded to a great team, he'll end up putting really good points on the board. But I don't know, it's very interesting to see here. Last summer, a league source told the Hockey News that Robertson's camp was upset about possibly being sent to the AHL, and that's why he remained with Toronto in 2022/23, even when he was scratched, and that ultimately culminated in him requesting a trade. And again, if and when he's traded, it's going to be interesting. I'm very curious to see the package that we can get back. And before we move on to Bertuzzi, which is really kind of another piece of big news here, what kind of package are you expecting for Nick Robertson at this point? Are you hoping for a 2nd-round pick, a 3rd-round pick? Obviously, you'll get some cap relief given some other moves that they're going to be making, but I can't expect or suspect that a big return is incoming here.
It's not going to be a big return, right? So don't get your hopes up. He's a great player still, and I think the Leafs can kind of shop him around in that way. But based on like his output, because of how little he's played and opportunity given, you're just not going to get a lot from him. So hopefully you get, maybe a usable player, someone that can plug into the lineup, maybe 3rd line or something like that, maybe a draft pick, but again, it's not going to be high. So maybe you'd rather opt for, somebody who can come into the lineup, but it's going to have to be low salary because the Leafs are going to be very close to the cap. So very interesting. I believed in this player, right? And I think once he gets traded wherever he goes, he's going to put up great points too. He scored 14 goals this season, being in the doghouse and barely playing. And when he did play, barely playing in the game. So I still think there's a lot left to this player. It's unfortunate that, he wants to move away from Toronto. He scored 55 goals in the OHL in 46 games one season. Like, this guy can score, right? You just have to give him a better opportunity with better players. So it's unfortunate. We'll see what comes of this, but I think most likely likely outcome is they move on from the player.
Maybe they include him in a bigger trade. Maybe Marner, maybe something else. Who knows? Maybe Lilligren. He's not going to get moved because he just got signed, but maybe at some point in the future, something like that happens. But yeah, Nick Robertson requested a trade. Let us know what your thoughts are on that. I wasn't expecting that tonight, so a little bit unfortunate, but I mean, it makes sense from his perspective. But this also just dropped. This is very recent. So Tyler Bertuzzi won't be returning to the Maple Leafs. His value has outpriced Toronto. He will land a deal elsewhere in the 4-year and over $5 million per year territory. He forgot to say per year, but obviously per territory. So this is interesting. We literally had a report earlier today, once they signed Max Domi, that they weren't out on Tyler Bertuzzi and that a deal could be worked out. We had a video on that earlier, I guess 2 videos ago now at this point, I guess, or 3, whatever it ends up being. There's too many to keep track. Bertuzzi is out of Toronto. He is not going to be returning to the Toronto Maple Leafs. So that means a few things. It means that they might pivot to Jake DeBrusk. They might pivot to some other guys in that kind of field. But Darius, Bertuzzi's gone, and he is not going to be returning to the Toronto Maple Leafs. This was suspected, even though, a couple of weeks ago, and even when they got eliminated, we're like, okay, Bertuzzi's going to be outpriced out of Toronto. Domi is going to be the guy, which ultimately is what happened. But over the past couple of weeks, we're given some false hope there about him returning.
Yeah, I had false hope about him returning up until just a couple hours ago because it was said that, they were working on something and it seemed like they were really trying to get something done tonight. But again, I think we've arrived at the most likely outcome, which we kind of knew even months ago that it was going to be Max Domi who returned and not Tyler Bertuzzi. And honestly, I'm pretty upset about it. Like, I'm pretty sad because this was a good player, right? And he really turned it on in the second half. And I would have loved to see him under Craig Berube because it's going to be a different style with the new coaching staff. So it's unfortunate, but he's priced himself out of Toronto, basically. He's a great player. He's going to get a lot on the open market, like I've said, and the Leafs are not going to be able to match it. They still have a lot to do, and they signed some questionable contracts today. And we're not even into tomorrow, actually, free agency, right? So we have no idea what the plan is. They don't have that much cap space left. But again, he really turned it on in the second half last season. He only had like 6 goals heading into January, I believe. And obviously in the playoffs, I mean, he neutralized Brad Marchand for the most part. So he was very useful for the Leafs. But unfortunately, he's going to get a lot of money on the open market. And I don't blame him at all for, taking that opportunity. Obviously, I think he was trying to work with the Leafs on a deal to stay here. But at the end of the day, if it's a difference of $1 million or $2 million, you got to do what's best for yourself, and he's going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, and rip the duo of Domi and Bertuzzi. Domi is coming back, and Brad Chilly made a great deal today, signing him to a 3.75 per year. But now Bertuzzi's gone. They signed Lilligren to $3 million. People are really upset about that, and I think ultimately I'm going to hold my judgment until they finish up tomorrow and what happens over the next few days. And again, this was on the same day where the Leafs qualified Nick Robertson as well. So, and then he requests a trade just hours later. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens. Again, we'll have you up to date with all the news tomorrow. Darius, tomorrow is hopefully the day where Tanev is a Toronto Maple Leaf, and then we see what happens. Obviously, the Mitch Marner trade stuff has calmed down a little bit. That's still very much in play, not necessarily tomorrow, but after tomorrow's moves. We suspect that Brad Living will probably start to pivot that way if that's their plan, and we'll have you up to date with all of it. So make sure to subscribe button, and we'll see you either on the stream tomorrow for the live draft, or not the draft, the free agency watch party, or in the multiple videos we drop. Stay tuned for that. Hit the notification bell. See you soon.